Have you considered what might happen to your retirement plans if a recession or bear market occurs in the years leading up to your retirement or in the first few years of your retirement? Have you considered the risk involved with making changes to your portfolio in response to bad economic news or market events? Today I'm going to walk you through three of the most important risk factors that you need to consider when you reach the retirement red zone so that you can make sure you're prepared for any possible situation that might come up at this time.
We often talk about this with clients as, I call this a retirement red zone. So as we're building up, as we're leading into retirement, we hit this red zone. It's about 5 to 10 years before your retirement transition until about 5 to 10 years after your retirement transition, where your portfolio will be the largest, right? Because we've been building it up for this moment, which means bad markets hurt the most and become the most prone time, where if a bad market comes and you are within a few years of retirement, you just got a few years into retirement, I can materially derail the timeline of your planned retirement.
In our last retirement video, we covered the basics of retirement planning, and we answered the three most important questions. Number one, how much money do you need to retire? Number two, how long is it going to take for you to save that money? And number three, how do you make sure that you never run out of money while you're in retirement? If you haven't watched that video yet, please go watch that video first and then come back and watch this one. In today's video, I'm going to cover the three biggest risk factors that you need to be aware of as you approach the retirement red zone. The retirement red zone is the 5-year period before you retire and the 5-year period immediately after you retire. If you make the wrong decisions in the red zone, you can actually completely, materially derail your ability to retire at all. The three core risks we're going to investigate are, number one, longevity risk, number two, behavior risk, and number three, sequence risk. The first risk that we're going to investigate today is longevity risk. Longevity risk is this really terrifying concept where you end up outliving your money while you're retired, and then you're left to fend for yourself. In our previous retirement video, Can You Afford to Retire?, we explained the idea of the 4% rule and how, if you use it correctly, you can have some level of confidence that you'll never run out of money while retired. But let me just add to that. The 4% rule is not 100% guarantee of success. It's really important that you have the right amount of insurance coverage because the 4% calculation can be completely compromised if you experience a catastrophic medical emergency or a life-changing event that forces you to take from your nest egg to cover it, especially if that withdrawal happens in the red zone period. But for the purpose of today's video, let's say that the 4% rule will cover you against longevity risk. In 1997, the Quarterly Journal of Economics published a study by Richard Thaler called The Effect of Myopia and Loss Aversion on Risk-Taking. In the study, the participants were given a basic 50-50 stock and bond portfolio to manage. In all cases, the returns were identical across all portfolios. One group of participants were given monthly statements, whereas the other group were given annual performance statements. Each time the participants received a portfolio statement, they were required to make a decision about how to react. They didn't have to react at all if they didn't want to, but they needed to report back to the researchers what action they wished to take, if any. The results of the study showed that the investors who saw the performance statements monthly were more likely to react by reducing their stock allocation. The second group of investors, who only saw their performance statements annually, actually had the opposite reaction. Rather than reducing their stock allocations, these investors were more likely to keep their stock investments as is or even increase their stock holdings. Why did these investors behave the way that they did? Well, the group of investors who were getting monthly statements were seeing stock losses 39% of the time, whereas the investors who received annual statements were seeing losses 14% of the time. The study outcome implies that the more we follow our returns, the more likely we are to tweak our investments, and that tweaking usually leads to much lower overall returns. This is why it's so important to have an investment plan, a strategy that uses a balanced risk-adjusted portfolio that will produce the required level of growth and limit the potential downside. If you're wondering which portfolios I recommend, watch my portfolios analysis playlist where I cover some of my favorite safe portfolios, which include the all-weather, the permanent portfolio, the golden butterfly, the Larry portfolio, and several others. The third, and arguably most important risk that you need to prepare for is sequence of returns risk. Take a look at this table. This is a real portfolio growth projection for an investor that we'll call Kim. Kim has determined that she needs about $35,000 worth of income from her portfolio each year, which will supplement a modest pension and some other small income she earns from some internet side hustles. Based on her needs, she's expecting that it's going to take her 10 to 11 years for her nest egg to grow to the $875,000 or so that she wants to cover the $35,000 worth of expenses. This projection is based on earning an 8% annual return from her retirement savings each year, as well as the home equity she's earning and her current 40% savings rate. To put this sequence risk idea into perspective, let's take a look at this chart of the S&P 500 stock index. Note how in March of 2000, the index hits resistance at $160 per share. Follow the dotted line to May 1st of 2013 when it finally recovers. Things aren't any better when it comes to the NASDAQ 100 index either, ticker symbol QQQ. You can see that in that case, it took 17 years for the NASDAQ to fully recover from the dot-com crash of 2000. I want you to imagine your entire investment portfolio is being 100% invested in one of these indexes. This is also known as the simple path to wealth strategy. You've been diligently making contributions each and every payday throughout the 1980s and 1990s, and you are expecting to retire at any point during the first 10 years of the new millennium. What do you think is going to happen to your retirement plans? Based on these charts we've just analyzed, not only are you not retiring in the 2000s, you may not be retiring at all in the case of the NASDAQ. So what's the solution here? Well, you want to think about your retirement plan as a ladder, which you ascend and descend over time. The bottom of the ladder is 100% stocks, or high-growth assets, and the top of the ladder is a mixture of government treasuries, gold, commodities, and some stocks. As you ascend this ladder, the risk increases the higher you go. For each few rungs that you ascend, you shift your allocation from stocks into other asset classes that are loosely or negatively correlated with stocks. Eventually, you'll reach the top of the ladder, which is the day you retire. This is where your risk is the highest, and your stocks allocation should be the lowest. And then you repeat the process in reverse as you descend the ladder. If the first 5 years or so of retirement have resulted in a lot of growth, then you might shift into a conservative wealth preservation portfolio rather than adding back in more stocks, but that's a decision that only you can make at that time. So I promised to explain 3 very important risks that we must consider when planning for retirement. The first risk was longevity risk, which we will tackle by ensuring that we comply with the 4% safe withdrawal rate, and we're going to make sure we'll have the appropriate level of insurances to cover any catastrophic medical or lifestyle event and to protect our portfolio. The second risk was behavior risk, which we're going to deal with by ignoring the news, ignoring hot stock tips, and any other investment advice. We have an investment plan mapped out already, and we're not going to compromise that by making changes to it midstream. The third and final risk was the most important, and that was sequence risk. We're going to take on sequence risk by using a laddered risk approach. We're going to go all in on high-risk stock indexes in our 20s and 30s, and then in our 40s and 50s, we're going to slowly decrease our stocks allocation so that we never put our retirement at risk from a decade or more long bear market or recession.